Spawned in the darkest pits of the universe, the piratical Eldar are a curse upon all races of the galaxy. For untold thousands of years they have preyed upon us, stealing forth from the shadows and dark places on their raids of terror and violence, massacring or capturing all whose paths they cross. That they are utterly evil and inhuman is without question. From High Lord Kuron, the Imperial Commander of Astyrax. The DRUKHARI are black-hearted reavers, to whom the galaxy and all of its peoples are but cattle to be enslaved at will. These alien pirates strike hard and fast from the shadows of the webway, vanishing again before the foe can fight back. They are a twisted reflection of their craft-world kin. They dwell in the strange realm known as the Webway, inhabiting Komara, a cyclopean interdimensional metropolis rightly feared as the Dark City. The DRUKHARI feed on negative emotion, dedicating themselves to a non-stop war with the peoples of real space, in which they strive to inflict as much pain and misery as they possibly can. Forced through a dark quirk of fate to abandon the once potent psychic abilities of their Aeldari ancestors, the DRUKHARI instead epitomize physical excellence. Their athleticism and speed are unmatched, except perhaps by their towering arrogance. Add to this their lethal, arcane science, and they are amongst the greatest of threats in an already deadly galaxy. The Dark Origins. 10,000 Terran years ago, amid the apocalyptic screams of a newborn god, the mighty Aeldari Empire fell to ruin. Yet the architects of this catastrophe were spared the worst of its wrath, hidden deep within the bounds of the Webway. They lurk there still, a race of unrepentant monsters damned to suffer an eternal thirst for the pain of others. The DRUKHARI have fallen from true grace in the most profound of ways. Their roots as a culture lie at the very height of ancient Aeldari society, when theirs was perhaps the most highly advanced species in the Milky Way galaxy. The Aeldari once boasted mastery over an interstellar civilization that was the greatest seen in the galaxy since that of the Old Ones. The various cultures of the Aeldari that exist today in the 41st millennium are only shadows of the glory of that ancient Aeldari empire. The true origins of those who now call themselves the DRUKHARI can be found in hidden enclaves amidst the atrocity and mayhem of the terrible time of the fall of the Aeldari, the great cataclysm that nearly destroyed their entire species. It was an event so terrible that not only did it kill trillions, but it breached the dimensional barrier between real space and the warp, and gave birth to the chaos god SLAANESH. The ancient Aeldari had perfected their science and technology to such an extent that they could remake planets and quench the light of the very stars at a whim. The need for labor or hard work in their society became nothing but a dim memory of a difficult past. The Aeldari, arrogant in the belief that they were now the true masters of their destiny, spent more and more of their time in esoteric pursuits and entertainments intended to escape the ennui that set in over the course of their centuries-long lives of ease and comfort. Their mind and psyche is a thing of duality. It can experience zeniths of bliss and nadirs of suffering far more keenly than that of the other intelligent star-faring races of the galaxy, including mankind. The Aeldari were capable of becoming just as irredeemably corrupt as they were of transcending their flaws and touching the divine. With so much power at their hands, the core worlds of the Aeldari Empire, once the height of civilization in the known universe, became centered solely on the pursuit of individual fulfillment and self-gratification. To understand the reasons for the fall, it is necessary to know something of the Aeldari mind and soul. An Aeldari's mind is incredibly complex. Their senses are extremely sharp, able to perceive incredible levels of detail. Their emotions can be so strong that a human's are merely pale shadows by comparison. They are extremely intelligent. Their thought processes are much faster than a human's. All of this means that an Aeldari experiences the universe and all its sensations to a greatly heightened degree compared to a human. Similarly, an Aeldari's soul is much brighter in the warp than those of lesser sentients like humans who do not possess such potent psychic abilities. The Aeldari are able to affect the nether realm of the Imperium much more than most other intelligent peoples. Every one of them is a latent psychic and has the ability to become a very powerful psyker with training. It is the psychic strength of their souls that was one of the primary causes of their downfall. Before the fall, during humanity's dark age of technology, they had an immense, galaxy-spanning empire comprising thousands of worlds, and some claim that it was larger and more powerful than even the Imperium of Man at the height of its power. They lived in relative peace. Barbarian races such as the Orcs were kept at easily manageable numbers and never had the strength to threaten the might of the Aeldari Empire. The humans were not yet virulently xenophobic and did not have a large interstellar domain, and the Tyranid hive fleets remained unknown. The Catan and Necrons, the ancient foes of the Aeldari, had been defeated long before and still remained dormant in the midst of their great sleep. Life on the Aeldari core worlds was idyllic, with fantastically sophisticated machines that took care of all the labor and manufacturing required to keep an advanced society functioning, leaving the Aeldari free to indulge in other, more aesthetic pursuits. With all menial work taken care of for them, they became indolent and decadent. They began to explore more deeply the arts of pleasure, delving ever deeper into hedonism. This descent into decadence spanned Terran millennia. Tradition and order disintegrated as the Aeldari pursued the limits of pleasure. Sects called pleasure cults were formed, dedicated to achieving the highest levels of hedonistic sensation, and their ceremonies and practices became ever more wild, eventually devolving into violence against one another and even the ritual sacrifice of their own kind. Some hated what their race had become and left their homeworlds for the unexplored and virgin maiden worlds or left on the newly constructed craft worlds, leaving the pleasure cults to their madness. Among the pleasure seekers and the interminably curious of the Aeldari were those whose pursuit of excess became ever more extreme. These included a great proportion of the aristocracy of ancient Aeldari society, who possessed the wealth and time to truly explore the meanings of decadence. One by one, the leaders of the pleasure cults that were becoming the centerpiece of Aeldari society became obsessed with their own power and gratification. They relocated their headquarters to the labyrinth dimension, known as the Aeldari Webway, for so great was their political influence that they could command the construction of entire extra-dimensional subrealms just for themselves. Unseen, these pleasure cult lords continue to grow in power and influence, initiating more and more of their populations into their strange and shadowy creeds of decadence. The Aeldari are the most psychically gifted of all sentient beings in the galaxy, and as the hedonistic corruption gradually seduced them, the echoes of their ecstasy and agony began to ripple through time and space. In the parallel dimension of the Imperium, the warp, the reflections of these intense experiences began to coalesce, as the shifting tides of the chaotic Empyrean can take form around the raw emotions emitted by the sentient beings of the material universe and attract even more of such similar psychic energies to themselves. The constant stream of individual selfishness and indulgence pouring into the warp from the Aeldari Empire nourished and empowered that which lay within. A nascent god of pleasure and pain, content to wait and to grow. As the Empire sank into corruption and decadence, brother turned against brother in pursuit of ever more extreme and darker pleasures. Some of the wiser Aeldari, however, foresaw the disaster that was approaching their society and fled from the core worlds to safety. The first of these were the Exodites, who chose to establish a network of planetary colonies known as the Maiden Worlds, far from the blighted heart of the Empire. Many of these Exodite colonies still exist in the galaxy, their cultures living in a symbiotic relationship with the world spirits of the planets they call home and protect. Among the last to escape from the Empire's core before the fall were the ancestors of the present day's craft world Aeldari. As their society collapsed into civilization-wide insanity, these ones recoiled in horror from what they were becoming. Realizing they stood upon the brink of destruction, they bent their considerable resources to the construction of the massive craft worlds, the graceful space-borne cities that were the size of small moons. The Aeldari of the craft worlds retreated into asceticism and spiritual introspection, preserving what they could of their ancient ways and culture before the time of the pleasure cults. They left the core worlds behind for the dubious safety of deep space, to the laughter and contempt of those who remained behind. Some even managed to flee far enough to escape the terrible destruction of the fall. Within the warp, the constant stream of indulgence and depravity poured from the Empire became as unstoppable as a tide. It nourished and empowered that which crystallized at its center, a nascent god of excess and amoral pleasure-seeking. The long millennia of Aeldari hedonism had made a massive impact in the psychic realm of chaos. Within the warp, the decadent Aeldari civilization was giving shape to a new major power of chaos, which grew and grew over thousands of Terran years, getting stronger and more defined until, suddenly, it sparked into a malevolent intelligence, a shatteringly huge and malign being with an immense and bottomless thirst for Aeldari souls. This was the birth of the Chaos God SLAANESH, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, better known as She Who Thirsts, to the Aeldari and all their descendants, for to them, SLAANESH was inherently female. The fall of the Aeldari. This process of psychic gestation lasted for thousands of standard years, corresponding to the historical era that was mankind's age of technology and age of strife. Although, when SLAANESH finally came into being, the results within the material universe were apocalyptic and sudden. As depravity riddled every aspect of Aeldari society, the pleasure cults sought ever more violent thrills. Before long, the streets of their cities ran with their blood. The elegant architecture of their palaces became battlegrounds as the Aeldari preyed upon each other, reveling in the cruelest of crimes. Their insanity and tainted passions poured into the warp until it finally achieved critical mass. With an apocalyptic bellow that tore the heart out of the Aeldari Empire, a new Chaos God was born, SLAANESH, the Dark Prince of Excess. An almighty psychic shockwave scythed across the galaxy, destroying countless billions of Aeldari souls as SLAANESH's birth cries echoed through the material realm. The souls of almost every Aeldari were stripped from them in an instant and devoured by the newborn Chaos God in a cataclysm of pain and terror. There were few survivors. Most were driven mad, their minds trapped half in the real world and half in the swirling insanity of the warp. A great warp rift was created in the material universe at the site of what had once been the center of Aeldari civilization, encompassing almost the entire empire and creating the Eye of Terror, thus marking the end of the era known to humanity as the Age of Strife. World after Aeldari world had fallen into the warp, to later be known as the Crone Worlds. SLAANESH gorged itself upon their horror and despair. Unstoppable in its ascendancy, the new god consumed the ancient deities of the Empire and scattered their psychic remains to the far corners of the Empyrean. The Aeldari civilization was gone. All that was left of the species were the exodites of the farthest flung maiden world, the craft world Aeldari, who had travelled far enough to escape the aftershock of destruction caused by SLAANESH's birth and the formation of the Eye of Terror, and those adherents of the pleasure cults who were hidden in the sub-realms of the webway. Much of the webway was shattered into ruin by the fall, but unlike the craft world Aeldari who fled the catastrophe in real space, these ones who had built their own jealously guarded empires in the webway, remained physically unaffected by Slaanesh's birth. The echoes of the new god's apotheosis still resounded within them, but unlike their kin in real space, they had escaped destruction. In their arrogance, they did not end their quest for excess and decadent pleasure, not even for a momentary respite following the death of their empire. Repentance and atonement were meaningless concepts for a people that no longer acknowledged any limits on their actions, regardless of the consequences. The change that was wrought upon those sealed within the webway was far more subtle. Rather than having their psychic essences, their souls consumed in one great draught by Slaanesh, their souls slowly drained away into the warp, taken over time by she who thirsts. They hate and fear Slaanesh above all other things, for she was given life by their actions, and yet she waits hungrily to claim each and every one of them, now or later. Where the Aeldari of the Craft Worlds learned to deny Slaanesh's hold upon them by using the mystical spirit stones, the infinity circuits, and the philosophies of the Asuriani path to safeguard their souls from consumption by she who thirsts, the Aeldari of the Webway became exceptionally good at ensuring that other beings suffered in their place. As long as they steeped themselves in the most evil and savagely decadent acts, the Aeldari of the Webway found that the curse of Slaanesh upon their people could be avoided. The psychic energy generated by the suffering and agony of others nourished their diminished souls and kept them vital and strong, filling their spare frames with unnaturally robust energies. Assuming that they could feed regularly enough upon the miseries of other intelligent beings, they became psychically immune to the passage of time, earning a twisted form of immortality. And so it was that the DRUKHARI were born, a race of sadistic murderers and fiendish torturers who feed upon the suffering of others in order to prevent the slow death of their own immortal souls. 10,000 standard years later, in the 41st millennium of mankind, Slaanesh's thirst consumes them still. There truly is no escape, for they have only exchanged a horrible but quick death for an eternity of infernal hunger and the infinite emptiness wrought by self-absorption and pure, amoral selfishness.